Welcome to today's Autistic Moment, a podcast for autistic adults by an autistic adult. My name is Philip King Lowe. I am the owner, producer, and host, and I am an autistic adult. Thank you so very much for listening. In 2022, the World Health Organization reported that while some progress has been made for disabled people to receive healthcare equities, the world is far from realizing this as a basic human right. Many disabled people continue to die early, have poorer health, and experience more limitations than others. LaToya Hinton is my guest speaker, who will talk about the healthcare equities that autistic women are not getting due to lack of access to getting a diagnosis and how it can affect their mental health. Come join us as we discuss autistic women thriving in healthcare equities on today's Autistic Moment. This first segment of today's Autistic Moment is sponsored by the Autism Society of Minnesota, known as AWESOME throughout Minnesota's autism community. As Minnesota's first autism resource for more than 50 years, AWESOME serves the whole state, the whole spectrum for the whole life. Visit AWESOME at ausm.org. In addition to the wonderful guests and conversations on today's Autistic Moment, you can find many more resources. Visit today'sautisticmoment.com to listen to over 120 episodes released since 2021. Check out the episode schedule 2026 to see upcoming topics, guest information, and program descriptions for Season 6. On the website, you can learn more about today's Autistic Moment, read the guest bios pages, explore the Adult Autism Resources links page, visit the Autistic Community Bulletin Board, read the blog, find out about TAM Autistic Consulting Services, sign up for a subscription to get ad-free interviews, support today's Autistic Moment with a donation. Every episode, including this one, has a transcript. The transcripts are sponsored by Minnesota Independence College and Community. You can read the transcripts right on the website or download printable versions to help you save ink. The transcripts have hyperlinks in them for names, organizations, and other resources named throughout the show that you can access to see if they are helpful to you. The transcripts use a dyslexia-friendly font that are available in English, Spanish, German, French, and Chinese Simplified. Want more interaction with today's Autistic Moment? Follow today's Autistic Moment on Facebook, including our community group page, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads. Also, follow us on the YouTube channel at Today's Autistic Moment to watch Autistic Voices roundtable discussions. New episodes will be coming up in 2026. I want to clarify some things about what we are doing with Autistic Advocacy Month. The autistic community and our allies have all contributed to making April as Autism Acceptance Month, which has helped us build a fantastic infrastructure. We know that many people are still going to celebrate April as Autism Acceptance Month, and we encourage those who will be to do that. There are many autistic people who have their issues with Autism Acceptance Month, who feel that while acceptance is an important step, it is no longer enough. The actions of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. last April and ever since regarding autism seems to be aimed at undoing all the work we have done to make Autism Acceptance Month what it is. We are beginning to name April as Autistic Advocacy Month to make the voices of autistic people heard loud and clear, that we will advocate for keeping our infrastructure and strengthen it. Autistic Advocacy Month is being introduced in April to tell people to listen to us, include us, and change the systems that harm us. What the current administration is seeking to do is to invalidate our voices, make us appear too incompetent to be heard and taken seriously, as if autistic people deserve to be stigmatized. Autistic Advocacy Month is our line in the sand that says, no, you will not destroy our dignity. We will advocate to change these systems that harm us and take back our territory of knowing ourselves, being proud of who we are, and assert the expertise and power of the autistic community that belongs to us in the month of April and throughout the year. We know that we will not change things in 1 month. Autistic Advocacy Month is being introduced to add stronger supports to maintain what we have all achieved, to take us into the next level. After the first commercial break, LaToya Hinton will join me to talk about autistic women thriving in healthcare equities. Today's Autistic Moment can be downloaded and heard on most podcast apps, including Apple, Google Play, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, iHeartRadio, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, TuneIn, Pandora, Amazon Music, Audible, Podcast Addict, Podcast Chaser. If you are looking for the transcripts, go to todaysautisticmoment.com, click on the episode you want to listen to, and follow the directions to find the transcripts. Thank you for listening to today's Autistic Moment.
Does it feel like all your support systems are in separate silos? Does it seem like there are mixed messages and you don't know which way to turn? Being part of a system is hard. It would be helpful to have the tools in your life toolbox to help navigate those silos. Looking Forward Life Coaching can provide support to fill that toolbox to prepare you to bridge those silos. Being person-centered, Looking Forward Life Coaching equips an individual to advocate for their needs. With coaching one-on-one, bridging the gap between the silos of services, you can feel more confident that your needs and desires are met. If you would like more information or would like to schedule a free meet and greet, please visit our website at www.lookingforwardlc.org or call us at 612-504-7414. Looking Forward Life Coaching helps change stumbling blocks of life into stepping stones towards success.
Autistic adults aren't getting the support we need. It affects our health, our income, financial stability, and our ability to live independently. ITI Assistive Technologies is changing that. This autistic-led team has created Decide with tools built for neurodivergent minds. One lets users quickly pick from custom lists based on their energy level. The other guides them through big decisions using simple agree-disagree statements that match their values. Visit itiassist.com/decide for more information about downloading the app to get all features for just $5 a month. Welcome back, everyone. Dr. LaToya Hinton is a multiply neurodivergent individual who is Eastern Band Cherokee and identifies with several West African communities. LaToya has been working with Umbrella ND to conduct panels of intersectional neurodivergent communities about healthcare equities. Please join me as I welcome Dr. LaToya Hinton back to today's Autistic Moment. LaToya Hinton, welcome back to today's Autistic Moment. It really is my pleasure to have you back, and so welcome.
Thank you for having me back. I'm excited to speak with you on this particular topic of autistic women and health equity.
Well, yes, you named it. We're going to talk about autistic women thriving through healthcare equities, how they are getting them, how they're not getting them, and how they're thriving through them, given the realities of what autistic women are facing with getting those healthcare equities. What important information can we give to introduce our audience to autistic women thriving through healthcare equities?
So I think the first piece that I would probably speak about from my own life experience would be having the knowledge to do some of your own self-assessments and things like that. If you think that you might be autistic, haven't had the resources to delve into that topic, because I know that there's a large population of women, I'll say, those who have lived in working class environments or in under-resourced environments, may not have even had the capital to be able to have a formal diagnosis. And I think that that is actually something to really look at a bit further, in the sense of a lot of autistic women are high masking. I won't say that all are,
right,
but I will say that that is a pattern that we see for folks who go undiagnosed for long periods of time. They have the ability to, maybe tell mental health officials, like a therapist, what they want to hear because they're so good at masking. That definitely was my own personal experience. So I didn't really start to do that critical self-reflection that I even needed to look at autism seriously until I was in my mid 30s. And I definitely was diagnosed with ADHD before I even started to have any sort of conversations with a therapist about an autism assessment. And since I was so high masking and maybe ADHD kind of looked like what my therapist was used to seeing with other, feminine presenting clients,
Right.
patients. I think that may have been why, certain questions were not even asked to me about the possibility of autism or that I should be assessed. And this is a huge pattern that happens quite frequently for folks who are ADHD and are women. And I think that, so, I'm definitely not alone in
Right.
this kind of trajectory of self-discovery and I would say self-advocacy. I definitely told my therapist that, I wanted to go deeper and wanted to understand more about autism and how it may play a role in my life. And then I found Embrace Autism, that website,
Yeah.
and I started to take a lot of self-assessments on there. I took the
Right.
CAT-Q, and the CAT-Q is actually really interesting because it's designed for folks who are high masking.
Right.
And so the questions that are asked kind of help you to, maybe get below the surface and kind of
Right.
understand, your autistic traits and how they're showing up in your life and the way that, you're somehow, coping and trying to present yourself in a certain way. I think for me, some of the signs were my mental health, early on, I had a lot of issues with anxiety and depression.
Right.
And a lot of the anxiety and depression stemmed from difficulties with building relationships. Full, right? So, like making those connections for myself before I even did any assessments allowed me that space to consider, how autism may play a role in just the way that my nervous system is reacting to the world around me.
Right.
I think there's a lot more understanding, I think, when it comes to the mental health field, in terms of like how to treat anxiety and depression. But there
Right.
isn't really a whole lot of understanding of what the root causes of anxiety
Right.
and depression may, where they're stemming from. And so I think that's maybe a gap for a lot of women who, are high masking and just don't realize for years out of their life that they should, try to learn more about autism. I would say other things too, like for me, I had multiple interests in my career. And this is something that a lot of ADHD people kind of talk about, that it's not just like one special interest or something like that. It's multiples. And then, you find yourself going in lots of different career trajectories for that reason. I think I've always really been good at seeing systems and patterns, and that has been really a benefit for me in
Right.
my career as well. So it hasn't just been this kind of impulsive, just choosing different routes without intention.
Right.
And so I think for me, that also was sort of a sign that most likely, I'm ADHD, is that I always felt like I had a whole lot of intention and like sort of deliberate agency in
Right.
choosing different routes in my career.
Yeah.
But that anxiety and depression was kind of always there in the
Right.
background. And that made it difficult for me to sometimes be able to describe to people around me who were my mentors in my career
Right.
what I was experiencing in terms of overwhelm, or if I felt like I was in that, like the freeze stage, where your amygdala is activated, and and you don't feel that you can move forward with a
Right.
decision that you've made, and being in that emotional state of freeze. I couldn't really explain why I was experiencing that, or why that would, that anxiety would kind of like maybe loop into a cycle of depression. Like I couldn't talk through that. I think mental health is also stigmatized in a
Right.
lot of spaces in our society. And, I was in higher ed, and I didn't feel, there were a lot of mindfulness activities and sort of like initiatives like that, where people could talk about managing mental health symptoms, but nobody was really saying what are the root causes of my mental health condition. And I think that's where sort of the missing piece was. And I couldn't really
Right.
open those conversations because I didn't have somebody in the mental health space who was neuroaffirming and understood autism or understood ADHD or how they interact with each other. They're just, the knowledge really wasn't there until very recently. And so now I'm starting to see more and more conversations coming from the mental health fields that are a lot more neuroaffirming and kind of understanding that anxiety and depression can stem from someone not being diagnosed with
Right.
autism, right?
Right.
Like that's kind of now common knowledge, I feel like, in the mental health space.
Right.
But it's recent. It's in sort of like recent history that has come about, and those conversations have started to allow more women to come forward and explain, the lack of access to a formal diagnosis as a child, and
Right.
how they're managing autism. And I think for me it opened a lot of awareness in terms of learning differences as well. I was able to talk quite a bit about dyscalculia and how I kind of felt like I didn't have a lot of options to enter into STEM fields because I didn't have the supports that I needed as a child as well. And so I
Right.
think a lot about how in the autism community, dyscalculia, there are a lot more, there are a lot more people with dyscalculia in the autism community and also in the
Right.
ADHD community, right? And so if I had
Mhm.
had some knowledge early on, it wouldn't have been shocking that dyscalculia is part of my experience as
Right.
well.
Yeah. So basically, what we are saying here, everybody, is that it is difficult for you to get your health equities for things that you don't know what your health equities are. And so
Correct.
because you're not sure what they need to be, that's why you're having problems finding them. And why
Right.
and the fact that those healthcare equities aren't out there for you because those are not out there for you, you are not sure what you should be reaching for. And since nobody's giving you those options, so you will know what you need to reach for, you're not getting them. You see, it's one of those things where we're saying for autistic women, how are you thriving through the healthcare equities you need when you're finding it difficult to show up for those needs yourself, okay? Which requires a certain degree of self-knowledge. And if you don't know you're autistic, you may not be aware of what those needs are. Okay. So, in effect, of what we're saying is that, thriving through those healthcare equities means, do you know what health equities you need because of
Right.
where you are? And you need help to find what those are. And because the ones that you need to reach for may not be there, you're feeling like there's nothing to really help you. You know what I mean? Does that sound
Right.
does that sound does that sound accurate?
It does. It does. And I think one of the things that I realized is having that self-awareness has allowed me to open opportunities that I wouldn't have had previously. So without doing some of these self-assessments, I wouldn't realize what kinds of supports I need to build relationships that are critical for my business to succeed.
Right.
I wouldn't know that I learn math in a visual manner and that I need certain tools and resources to be able to master specific mathematics concepts in order to be successful as a data analyst and a grant writer. So it's things like that where without having access to supports, I think a lot of women kind of just close doors on what what could be possible opportunities for advancement in their careers. And then that then filters into kind of everything else. You know, are you able to support your family members if you are a mother or if you are a caregiver? Because if you don't have access to, you know, certain career trajectories, then you're kind of frozen. You know, there's no way to sort of advance. Like you may feel like, you know, I'm never going to be able to go into a leadership position because I was never given that mentorship that I needed. And in order to get that mentorship, I needed to be part of certain social networks. And I was never able to be part of those because I didn't realize I was autistic. Right. So it's like there are all these sort of layers of inaccessibility when you don't have that self-awareness that would prompt you to realize that you need certain supports in order to thrive.
How are you going to thrive through something, you know, because those equity options aren't available to you? You don't know you're not reaching out for them because you don't know what those options are. And what we've been seeing right now, as far as healthcare, that sort of thing, is the options of what's out there so that people will know what they can reach for, that they can actually get, is creating the problem for them to have those healthcare equities. So how do they thrive through something that they're not getting if those supports aren't already out there? After this next commercial break, LaToya will talk more about what the panel discussions have revealed about autistic women finding their way through healthcare equity. Are you looking for a space where you don't have to explain your autism to be seen, heard, or understood? We are the Autistic Peer Support Coaching Collective, the world's first autistic-led peer support coaching organization. In a world that pathologizes our differences, isolates us, and pushes toxic individualism, APSCC offers something radical: community, connection, and care. Our coaches are all autistic adults, trained professionals, supporting our fellow autistics with tools for advocacy, regulation, and everyday thriving. We know how hard it is right now. Stigma, burnout, misinformation, it's everywhere. But you don't have to face it alone. Peer support is not just helpful, it's necessary. Community is not a luxury, it's how we survive. Showing up in our full autistic selves with our stims, our sensitivities, and our joy is an act of resistance. In a world that tells us to hide or disappear, we choose to be visible together. You'll find one-on-one coaching, free support groups, educational workshops, and more, all rooted in the neurodiversity paradigm, built by autistics for autistics. Come be part of something real. Visit autisticcoaches.com. Support for today's Autistic Moment comes from Best Care Home Care Agency. Best Care offers PCA services and your friend or family member could be your paid PCA. Best Care also offers homemaking, FMS services, and 2, 4, 5D services throughout the Metro and Greater Minnesota. Visit their website, bestcaremn.com, to learn more about their services.
MICC provides transformative education and training for autistic and neurodivergent adults to live independently, work purposefully, and thrive in community. With hands-on learning and caring guidance, MICC participants accomplish things they never imagined, from daily living tasks like taking public transportation or managing finances, to building and sustaining a career and lifelong friendships. Learn more about our inclusive community in Richfield, Minnesota at micc.org.
I hope you are enjoying my conversation with LaToya Hinton. Coming up in April, we will have our first Autistic Advocacy Month with the 2 shows, Our Boundaries, Our Responsibilities on April 12th, and Our Boundaries, The Responsibility of Others on April 16th. We have had 15 responses to the Autistic Advocacy Month questionnaire. Click on the link in the transcript for Autistic Advocacy Month questionnaire to participate. I am continuing to work on making the podcast more interactive with the autistic community, but I need your financial support for today's Autistic Moment to make it all happen. Support today's Autistic Moment in any of the following ways. Make a one-time donation through the coffee icon when you tap on Support Today's Autistic Moment on todaysautisticmoment.com. Subscribe monthly via Patreon. Purchase items at Today's Autistic Moments logo shop. Share today's Autistic Moment with your family, friends, co-workers, and others through social media and or by telling others about us. Donations are not tax deductible, but help keep today's Autistic Moment as a safe space. Thank you for supporting today's Autistic Moment. Welcome back. Before the commercial break, LaToya told us about her experience getting healthcare equities, such as having access to get a diagnosis to know that she is ADHD. We also asked the question, how can autistic women reach for healthcare equities when the opportunities are not available for them to find healthcare equities? Now we are going to talk about what LaToya and the team at Umbrella ND have been learning from their panel discussions. It is my understanding that you have been doing a lot of panel discussions around healthcare equities. What are you hearing in those conversations?
I'm hearing a lot of women talk about needing holistic supports, especially as they age. I'm hearing a lot of women start to say, when I was in my 20s, I was able to mask really well, and I had a lot of job opportunities, and I was able to get, my basic needs. But then as I got, into my 30s and my 40s, I had experienced multiple cycles of burnout. And because of the aging process, I was not able to mask as well, or I wasn't able to recover, right? Because for autistic people, we can mask all we want, but there's a point in time where we need recovery. So, you can go to a social event and seem like you are really, connecting with lots of people, but it's requiring a lot of energy. It's requiring a lot of energy to be able to get through, say for instance, a networking event. And then a lot of us will say after we've gone through that networking event, we need to sort of like completely relax and not focus on anything else and, go through a recovery of our energy and then kind of be able to come back in and do that again. Well, maybe you need a little less rest when you're younger than you do when you're in your 30s and 40s. So it starts to become a bit more apparent that the masking is less sustainable as you age. Also, I would say women's bodies go through different changes as we age. So we have less access to certain hormones that we had when we were younger. If you start to go into perimenopause, which for some women can be like as early as like mid 30s, could be 36, 37. You start to go into this process where you have less estrogen. And then that just kind of continues throughout your life. And, and it fluctuates as you age, but that can affect, how your brain functions. I know for a lot of women who are ADHD, estrogen even acts as dopamine. And so having less estrogen, you have less dopamine. And so it's difficult, your ADHD symptoms might be amplified for that reason as you head into perimenopause and then menopause when you're a bit older, maybe into your 50s. And so I think that, understanding women's bodies and how we age and how, we may have access to hormone replacement therapy and how that can affect our nervous system. Like those kinds of conversations are coming out quite a bit in health equity panels that speak with women who are late identified autistic and late identified ADHD, because, I think we're just in the infancy of understanding neuroscience, but then we're also in the infancy of understanding women's health, because not much research funds have gone into women's health over the years. And so we're just now kind of getting to that point where you have a lot of women who are OBGYNs who are starting to say, let's do some comprehensive research with our patients and really understand what gaps we have in understanding how a woman's body functions. And I think that that's what we're kind of seeing when we're trying to understand what health equity would look like for autistic women. We have to kind of understand that our body is changing as we age, and then systems that are built for neurotypical people maybe work for us when we're younger and then kind of no longer work for us as we age. And then what sort of supports do we need if that's the case? So those are the kinds of things that I've definitely spoken with other autistic women and other ADHD women about. And I think it's fascinating because we are in the age of information. And so a lot of this self-awareness comes from being around other people who are self-aware and being able to pinpoint patterns. And it's not just on social media, it's in face-to-face circumstances as well. We might have the initial awareness from something that we saw online, but then that spurs us to find other women who have had similar experiences to us and sit down and have deep conversations with them. And I think that's maybe the missing piece that folks don't hear about in the media, is that it's actually been social media awareness has kind of created this catalyst for us to, kind of build communities that are aimed at understanding each other better and figuring out what possible solutions there may be. There's also a lot of resources exchange. And, if I find a particular accessibility tool that works for me, I share it with other women who have had similar life experiences to me. I want to pay it forward. And I also know that, what I do to help other people will ultimately help me. And so
Right.
I think there is that sense of having accountability for the knowledge that you have, and how that can affect other people positively. And so I
Right.
think for me, like, that's maybe a piece of the health equity puzzle that isn't talked about as much, is like, what do you do once you have that awareness
Right.
and the science is in its infancy? Well, you have to have that community component in there for folks to then say, okay, what are our next steps now that we have a little bit of glimmer of light, we have a little bit more knowledge than we had in the past, what can we do with that knowledge in order to make sure that folks have the resources and the supports they need to thrive. And I think for me, it's been just a lot of community building. I've
Yeah.
used social media to help me. I have this neurodivergent women leaders creative mentorship and support LinkedIn group. I do a poll every week, and sometimes I ask specifically about health equity topics. Sometimes I just talk about leadership. Sometimes they cross over with each other. But I want to create these spaces where we can exchange knowledge. And I think
Right.
community building is a huge piece of that, so that we can fill in gaps for each other. And folks that join that leadership group, some of them are in the mental health space, some of them are in mental health tech, some of them
Right.
are in women's health tech. And so they are, creating these accessibility tools for folks to learn more about how their bodies work, or learn more about how to get access to a neuroaffirming therapist. And so I think that that's a huge component, is
Right.
how do you get a lot of people together that can support each other, whether that is through tech tools, whether it's through, advice, mentorship, whether it's through just, referring people to services that exist. There's just so many different things that we can do in terms of community building that can help us thrive.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Where do you see autistics thriving, not just surviving, by through healthcare equities? I know this sounds like we're doing a play on words here, but I return to what I have said in the past. You need to be the expert, not an expert, the expert about your own brand, make, and model of autism. Why? Because if you don't know what your brand, make, and model of autism is, you can't advocate for something that you don't even know how to show up for. Okay. You can't advocate something for yourself if you don't know what it is you need to advocate for. The other part is that you need to be the expert about how you communicate what being autistic means for you. And part of the way of doing that, one idea about doing that, is you need to tell your stories about what being autistic means for you, so that others will be able to understand what it is you need. If you can't do that, people are not going to know what being autistic means for you. So therefore, they're not, because they're not putting those out there for you, you're not sure what to reach for. You're not sure what story you need to tell. And therefore, it's not that you're telling them, but they're not hearing you. Okay. Basically, what this boils down to is I want healthcare equities. I just don't know what options are out there to help me get them, because a lot of those options aren't there. You know, can and this is where, a lot of our intersectional identities, we're having difficulties finding those healthcare equities because we don't know what we need yet, because the options that we need are not out there. And so it's difficult for us to understand what we need to reach for if we don't even know what we need to access it. Go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've realized recently is understanding support needs. It's almost like you have to hear a lot of different neurodivergent people talk about the structures that they've created for themselves to thrive. It's like you've got to do a deep dive research project into that. And
Right.
then as you're doing that, you say to yourself, I've had a similar challenge, or I've had a similar experience, and I haven't chosen that particular solution before. Maybe I should think about trying that out. You kind of have to have that critical thinking of maybe this could work for me, or this won't work for me in my life circumstance because XYZ. And you sort of have to be self-motivated in that sense of being open to listening to other people's experiences and then evaluating whether or not what they did would work in your life circumstance. And
Right.
so and I'll give an example. I went to a summit for entrepreneurs with ADHD recently.
Right.
It's digital. And I was just listening to lots of different entrepreneurs, and some of them got on and they would say right away in the very beginning, I'm ADHD. So what works for me is not going to work for someone who's just, experiencing ADHD, or someone who's just experiencing autism. Like, this is going to be a really different life experience. And so the supports that I describe in my business journey may not apply to what the audience needs, right? Like having those kinds of conversations of just being very transparent, I think is really, really helpful, because then when your audience is listening, they realize that they can either say at that point, well, I don't have the autistic experience, so maybe this isn't going to be, maybe some of it will be relevant to me, but maybe not all of it will be. Or they can, kind of make that decision about, whether certain aspects of what you're saying in terms of advice and mentorship are going to fit with their experience. So that's all to say that I think we need lots of role models of people who are thriving in their lives with our experiences, or at least very similar experiences. And I think then at that point, when you have an example, then you can say, oh, if they talked about having a neuro-affirming therapist, and this is what, they gained from, going to those sessions, or, this particular person had a business coach, but that business coach was neuro-affirming and understood the challenges of autistic business owners. Something along those lines. If you have access to people kind of talking about partaking in particular supports and then getting out into the world and thriving, then you have a blueprint. You have a roadmap at that point of what might work for you. And so I think like that's kind of one, with the neurodivergent creative mentorship and support page for neurodivergent women, I think that's where we are creating these spaces where you can see people at different levels of their career, and maybe even like different levels of building a family, or different levels of community advocacy, right? Like you kind of get to see folks following their calling and what that looked like for them over time, and what supports were necessary at different stages of their life. Like whether, maybe they are able to talk about certain supports that worked for them when they were in their teens and their 20s versus what worked for them now in their 30s and their 40s, or, and there are folks in that group all the way up to like age 70, plus. So I think like having those role models, folks that, and I'll say it too, that there are a lot of late diagnosed people in that group, a lot of late identified people in the group. And I think it's really insightful for them to talk about unmasking and authenticity and what that looks like for them in their lives now. I think especially for young women to be able to kind of see, oh, I don't have to mask, or I, can be my authentic self. And this is, you know, a roadmap or a blueprint for doing that and still being successful in all of these, you know, different areas of focus. I think having that kind of transparency is super inspiring for young people who are, you know, thinking to themselves, I've been given this diagnosis and I kind of felt like I had constraints on what I was, you know, capable of accomplishing in my life. But now I see all of these role models and they're giving me these, you know, solutions in terms of support needs, and just also, you know, purpose and motivation. I think we need those kinds of examples so that we, you know, kind of have something to launch off of. You know, you don't know what your possibilities are if you don't
Right.
have any sort of model. So that's my take.
Yeah.
It's tough. It is really, really tough in the sense that, like I said, neuroscience and women's health are both in their infancy. And
Right.
so, you know, in terms of what we really have in terms of scientifically backed, you know, solutions and supports, like a lot of that is missing. But we may have some social supports that exist. We might have some community supports that exist, you know, in terms of mentorship. And I'm talking about mentorship in like a holistic sense, and like mentorship in terms of well-being, being able
Right.
to see models of people who, you know, actually aren't going through chronic burnout and actually, you know, have found a bit of a balance in their lives because they know what their limits are, what their limitations are, but they also, you know, are brave and courageous and are leaning into their strengths at the same time. Like we need to kind of see that kind of example in the autistic community. So it's not just deficit based and we don't feel like we're stifled or we're stuck, but we feel like there is a sustainable way to move forward with our goals and our aspirations. And that has a lot to do with our holistic health.
In other words, we can't really reach those things if they're not out there because we won't know what those equities are. So what we're having a problem with, you know, and I'm trying to, maybe I'm not presenting this in the right light. You know, here's another way of looking at it. If autistic women are being sent the message, you don't really exist because there are no autistic women. Okay. So therefore, we are not going to respect and provide your rights when you show up to be this person. So we are in fact discriminating against you because this is how you are showing up and this is not what we will tolerate, you know, nor will we maintain the dignity of that you can't wear us, you know what I mean? Am I not phrasing this right?
No, I mean, I think that there is something to be said about not being able to self-advocate because you don't know yourself.
Right.
I think that there is a layer to this whole conversation, which is about self-discovery,
Right.
to even have the sense that you should be advocating for something different. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. After this final commercial break, LaToya and I will talk about some resources to help autistics thrive through healthcare equities. Today's Autistic Community Bulletin Board will follow. There are those who would say that discovering that you are autistic rewrites your life history. It can put you in a space of reflecting on what has happened throughout your life and start you on a path of self-rediscovery. You can also find yourself trying to manage your life in the here and now while asking yourself questions like, what do I do with all of this? Does any of this sound like something you are experiencing? An autistic who is a consultant can help you with what is happening and find resources such as other professionals who can assist you. I can help you through my service, TAM Autistic Consulting Services. Go to todaysautisticmoment.com and read about TAM Autistic Consulting Services. If interested, please fill out the intake form and make an appointment so we can begin working together.
Hello, autism community. My name is Lisa Morgan. I'm an autistic adult too, and I know firsthand what it feels like to be unintentionally harmed by well-meaning professionals when reaching out for help. My passion is to help autistic people find and use their own unique strengths to help themselves. Are you rule-based, a literal thinker, have a focused interest? Let's figure out together how to use the strengths of autism to find solutions. I offer life coaching for autistic adults and individualized workshops for professionals. To find out more, go to autismcrisissupport.com.
Today's Autistic Moment will celebrate Autistic Advocacy Month in April with 2 excellent shows about boundaries. On April 12th, Becca Lori Hector and I will present Autistic Advocacy Month, Our Boundaries, Our Responsibilities. What are boundaries? Do autistics know what boundaries are and how to communicate them? Becca and I will suggest some answers to these and many of the questions that autistics have about our boundaries and our responsibilities. On April 26th, Coach Lee Hopkins and I will present the episode Autistic Advocacy Month, Our Boundaries and Responsibility of Others. Autistics are often stereotyped as not knowing or managing our own boundaries, so others assume that they must take responsibility for our boundaries. Autistics do in fact know what our boundaries are, and we may need some tools for how we communicate what those boundaries are to someone else. What are their responsibilities? Coach Lee Hopkins and I will give you some suggestions as to how autistics can manage their boundaries and know what the responsibility of others are. Thank you for listening to today's Autistic Moment. Welcome back, everyone. In this final part of our conversation with LaToya Hinton, we are going to suggest some resources to help autistics with thriving through healthcare equities. Where can we help autistic individuals find resources, especially since, right now the resources they're being cut back. That's why we're not able to find them. What are some resources that we can find so that we can thrive through those healthcare equities?
I think a neuroaffirming therapist, I think there is a database that you can include in the show notes, where folks can find a neuroaffirming therapist, meaning someone who has a lot more experience with autism and ADHD and understanding what actual advice and what actual resources and solutions work. Because I think mental health is a huge, huge piece of thriving as an autistic person. So I think that's kind of number one, something that I always talk about. I think One of the things that I don't hear a whole lot about, which I would love to hear more about, is occupational therapy and how finding a specialist that is also neuroaffirming and understanding what kinds of adjustments help lots of autistic people. We know that like once you know one autistic person, it's you just know that one person. But I think like being able to recognize patterns in terms of like physical supports as well as the mental side of things could be a game changer. I had watched a YouTube video of someone who is, I want to say, a writer, and was just talking about lots of. It was like one of those a day in the life kinds of videos, right? And she was definitely had access to an occupational therapist and a neuroaffirming therapist, and she walked through how the things that she does in terms of mindfulness throughout the day, taking breaks frequently, having the ability to like recenter herself if she's feeling some sort of overwhelm, even things like in being able to sit down on a chair in the bathroom and brush your teeth and take your time, and just creating these kinds of accessible environments where you're not putting as much stress on your nervous system, and being able to take lots of breaks. There was something about that looked so sustainable to me. And I think a lot of us are visual learners. And so being able to see the evidence of someone who has these mental and physical supports and how that's manifesting in their body, you can see whether someone has a lot of stress in their shoulders and their neck, or whether they're having problems with their digestive system because they're under a lot of stress. Like being able to see people release and look physically calmer because they are taking care of themselves, because they have these supports in place. I think just something about that is so refreshing. And I think from a woman's point of view, like being able to talk about women's health, what does that look like for those that, are able to talk about the perimenopause process or going into menopause, and, having those kinds of supports that are holistic. There's just something about that I think, allow women to self-reflect and say, I realize that I'm able to live a life that is a bit more sustainable, and I don't have to constantly think about how I'm burning out or going through overwhelm on a regular basis. And so visual representations of what the supports look like, and those supports coming from occupational therapists and also coming from therapists that have worked with autistic people.
So if you can provide what those resources are, I will include them on the Adult Autism Resources links page on todaysautisticmoment.com, and you will be able to find those resources and go to them and see if you can find what you need there. Okay. So but we're supplying the resources, and this is what you can find, and then and that sort of thing. So, and if you're looking for something and you're not finding it, we'll have multiple different resources to see if you can find what you really do need, that sort of thing.
And I'd love to just add, I mentioned several times my LinkedIn group that I co-own with a friend, Eliana Bravos, who is a co-founder of ND Connect, which is a peer mentorship support platform. So it's outside of LinkedIn, but she and I kind of came together and decided to build Neurodivergent Women Leaders Creative Mentorship and Support, because we felt like there were a lot of women who needed the community's support as well as these kind of health resources. So if you are an autistic woman and you're listening to this and you're like, wow, mentorship at different stages of life would be beneficial for me, we definitely invite you to that group. I basically just review. So if you go onto LinkedIn and you go through groups and you search for us, our page will come up, you'll click on it, and then I will probably be the one to review it and just accept you into the community. And then you have access to so many different women and so many different fields of study.
Right.
So if you're looking for career support or you're looking for just well-being resources, you'll definitely find a lot of people with lived experience that can help you.
LaToya Hinton, thank you so much for being with me on this episode of today's Autistic Moment. It has been so amazing to have this conversation with you. And, again, thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you again.
I appreciate it, Philip. Thank you for the invitation. And it was, a heartwarming talk as always.
In addition to the resources that LaToya mentioned, please go to the transcript and/or the Adult Autism Resources links page for the neurodivergent practitioners community. If you listen to my conversation with LaToya Hinton and you are thinking, hey, Philip, I really enjoyed the conversations, but the segmentation, music, and ads were so distracting, I have a great alternative for you. Sign up for a subscription to ad-free interviews on today'sautisticmoment.com. The subscription is only $12 a month or $144 for a whole year. Once you buy the subscription, you can click on any show where you see the logo for Today's Autistic Moment ad-free interviews to hear only the interview without interruption, segmentation, and music. You can listen to all ad-free interviews going back to July 2025 and all upcoming episodes. Today's Autistic Community Bulletin Board. All these events and many others, such as sensory-friendly concerts, art activities, and museum information links, are available on today'sautisticmoment.com/bulletin board. For more than 30 years, the Autism Society of Minnesota has hosted the Minnesota Autism Conference, which brings together autistic adults, caregivers, educators, service providers, therapists, and advocates from across Minnesota and beyond. In 2026, Awesome is making a shift to a virtual 2-day format. This change helps lower ticket prices and increases access with no travel, no hotel costs, less time away from work or caregiving, and more flexibility for how and when you participate. Tickets are now on sale for $149.99. Awesome members get $50 off, but there is another way to save even more money. Autistic Minnesotans can request the scholarship rate, which is just $74.99. Since scholarships are funded by Awesome's donors, they are not available to people outside of Minnesota. The scholarship rate is available to all Minnesotan autistics, including those marginalized by race, gender, sexuality, and more. The Adult Coffee Club for Autistic Adults in Minnesota are held on the second Tuesday of every month, weather permitting, at Dogwood Coffee, located at 2700 University Avenue West, Suite 100 in St. Paul, Minnesota. The zip code for your GPS is 55114. The adult coffee clubs will begin at 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. There will be no coffee club in April. Coffee clubs will resume on May 12th, June 9th, July 14th, August 11th, September 8th, October 13th, November 10th, December 8th. Understanding Autism virtual classes are offered by the Autism Society of Minnesota. The next classes will be April 13th, 10 to 11 a.m., May 11th, 12 to 1 p.m., June 8th, 6 to 7 p.m., July 13th, 10 to 11 a.m., August 10th, 12 to 1 p.m., September 14th, 6 to 7 p.m., October 12th, 10 to 11 a.m., November 9th, 12 to 1 p.m., December 14th, 6 to 7 p.m. On May 7th, beginning at 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m., Joyner Emmerich will present a workshop at the Autism Society of Minnesota entitled Autistic House to Home, A Guide to Affirming Home Space. Save the date, May 17th, 2026, beginning at 9 a.m. to 12 noon for the Steps for Autism. The Steps for Autism will be at The Rock at the St. Louis Park Rec Center, located at 3700 Monterey Drive, St. Louis Park, Minnesota, 55416. This is an outdoor event in the covered hockey rink behind the rec center. There will be fun and inclusive events, a resource fair, a flash dance, and sensory walk, costumed characters, and community building opportunities. Go to ausm.org to the menu option to download the Summer Programs Catalog 2026 to learn more about these and other social and recreational programs, educational events, counseling services, and support groups at the Autism Society of Minnesota. Neurodivergent is a social club rooted in a vision of bringing neurodivergent Minnesotans together to build meaningful connections. Its core principle is to foster an environment where all are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of ability or preferences. Go to their website, minneurodivergent.org, for more information, become a member, volunteer, and attend their events. Today's Autistic Moment is here because of the generosity of supporters and sponsors. Go to todaysautisticmoment.com and select Support Today's Autistic Moment to donate. If you have questions about today's Autistic Moment, please send an email to todaysautisticmoment@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to Today's Autistic Moment, a podcast for autistic adults by an autistic adult. May you have an autistically amazing day. All of the guests meet with me on Zoom to record the interviews. The interview transcripts are provided by Otter. The podcast is prepared and edited on WavePad Masters Edition by NCH Software. The podcast is published by Spotify for Podcasters. The music that you hear is licensed to Today's Autistic Moment by PremiumBeat.com.